Hey there, it's Dan Kenner with episode number 116 of The Casual Author. Today is Monday, April 22nd, 2024, as I record this. And today we're talking to Kyro Dean about the necessity of creativity. We talk about how she got into creating and why she became an author, as well as how instrumental being creative is to her life in making sure she's satisfied and is doing the things that make her feel like she's progressing and moving forward. So if that's something that you can resonate with, you'll definitely want to stick around for that part of the conversation. Of course, I'll mark in the show notes the the listing and the time of when the interview starts. If you would just want to skip to that, feel free to go ahead and do that. But in terms of homestead updates this week, last week our first goat had babies. So Adele is actually the one of our first babies ever born years ago. She came from the original goats we purchased at the beginning of our journey. She had twins. So you can generally expect that they'll have twins, triplets. They're both little bucklings and they're just white. They white, brown, gray. They're kind of very multicolored. They're very adorable. I did post a video on Instagram and TikTok. If you follow me there, you will have seen it. Otherwise, you'll just have to wait until my email list goes out next week because they were actually born the day after I sent out my last email. So you wouldn't have seen them. But in any case, yeah, it was great. It's awesome to be done with that pregnancy for her and then just one fewer goat to have to worry about. Now, I doubt we'll have any problems. The birth went great. I didn't really even have to assist that much. I didn't get that much sleep that night, but that's a long story. Regardless, yeah, she mostly did everything on her own. I just had to help the babies dry off a little bit because she couldn't keep up with how cold it was. It was about 22 degrees, which isn't terrible, but when they're still wet, one of them was shivering pretty bad. So once I got him all dried off, he was happy as can be. Now they're just hopping around and living their best life. But that means we have two more. So this is kind of an interesting tidbit about goats. It's not always surprising when they go into labor because there's a pretty good indicator. So just around each side of their tail, they've got a short little tail. If you feel it on their back, just right there, there's these two thick cord ligaments. And when those disappear, you pretty much know they're going to be having their babies within a 24-hour period. It's usually 12 to 24 hours. Um, and we found it's closer to the 12 hours. So we're not ever really surprised. I knew the goat was going to be having the babies. I hoped that it wasn't in the middle of the night. And I got 5 a.m., which, it could have been worse. I didn't get to sleep till late that night for the human kids kept me up. So I only got a couple hours of sleep, but it's okay. Everything went great. So still just filling the ligaments. Haven't no indication that the other two will have their babies anytime soon, but who knows? I mean, those ligaments can disappear in an hour. So we just check them regularly to make sure. But yeah, I mean, that's the most exciting thing from a homestead perspective, other than we are battling a massive rock chuck in our garden. We live near a gravel pit. Um, and it's like a breeding ground for rock chucks. So we've been having them slip into our yard, and one is right up by the garden. So yeah, see, we haven't planted anything yet, but we need to deal with the rock chuck as soon as possible, in whatever way necessary, so that it doesn't eat our garden. So that's something that we're dealing with today. But fortunately, we're not planting anything yet. We have some time to figure that out. Hopefully, more rock chucks don't move forward. We're wondering if in the past years we haven't had any issues with it because our neighbors have always had dogs and they probably scare them away. Um, so that begs the question, do we need to get a dog? Perhaps. Perhaps someday we will actually get a dog. Knowing us, I would not be surprised if it happens very, very quickly. But for now, no dog. And we'll just deal with it in the best that we can. Let's see. In terms of author updates, I've been making significant progress on Dwarf Blooded. I'm just shy of 50,000 words. I can write about anywhere from 10,000 words a week, which, isn't the fastest in the world, but it's definitely not slow. I'm pretty happy with the story so far. Really thrilled about where it's going. I've also made, I would say, some decent headway on the covers. Definitely not ready to share those covers quite yet, but I've shared them with a couple people in, beta format of the covers, and everybody said they really like them. It's really just about getting the text right, particularly as a colorblind person, because each book has its own color theme. Don't worry, I Googled hex codes. for the color codes. Like, what is the hex code for dark purple, right? And then if it looked generally okay, I stuck it in there. Everyone agrees that the colors look fine, but the text is tricky, right? Because some of them are darker than others. Some of them have a little bit more intricacies around the text, others don't. And so it's just about getting the text right so it shows up very clearly and very well, which some are better than others. But yeah, we're just having fun with that, just trying to upskill myself in the book cover realm. But in terms of the stories themselves, so the next chapters of The Etcher's Plight and Dragon Blooded are now posted on my Ream. So you get 2 chapters per month. If you're interested in joining, you can get early access to everything that I'm working on. And yeah, like I said, the next chapters are posted. So if you want to go to reamstories.com/Dan Kenner, you can see those. You can join my community to get early access to those. I'm really having fun with the community, figuring it all out. I think Ream Stories is an amazing platform for those who want to deliver either serialized stories or, um, you know, just early release content of their books. They have their own e-reader, which is pretty legit, and they have a lot of just mechanisms in place to make the experience good for both the author as well as those who are reading. You can even leave comments for if you get early access to those about things you like, didn't like, feedback. So that's kind of fun. A lot of people really like that. This is not a sponsored comment, by the way. I'm not being sponsored by Ream. I'm just commenting on how I think it's a really cool platform. So if you're an author listening and you think, hey, I really do like serialized fiction, or I like the idea of giving early access to my chapters, check it out. I mean, it's not too complicated to set up. And I think it's a replacement essentially for Patreon, or not necessarily Substack, because they're kind of different in the way that they work, but it's meant to replace Patreon. And I know a lot of people prefer it over that. So something to keep in mind if you're an author. I don't believe that there are any other updates this week, so we can go ahead and shift over to the interview portion with Kyro. Hey, Kyro, how are you doing today?
I am doing great. Thank you, Dan.
I'm excited to talk to you to talk about your passions and specifically dig into creativity and just creation in general. But before we get to that fun discussion, how long have you been writing and publishing books?
I started writing books about 7 years ago, after my youngest was born. That was the outlet I chose to try after that one. And I started publishing about 2 years ago.
Okay, excellent. So, did you have a lot of books written right before you got to the publishing stage then, or not so much?
I did actually. I had 22 books written before I
Oh,
decided to publish.
that's a lot. Yeah. I talk to people, they're like, yeah, I had like two or three. 22. That's awesome.
22, yeah. Mhm.
Very, very cool. So what made you wait to publish then if you were writing those books? Was it just like a comfort thing or
No, the landscape for indie publishing has changed a lot.
Mhm.
And 7 years ago, it was still new and everyone was still aiming for that, trad publishing gold star. And
Yeah.
so I was following the steps you took to do that. You write your book, you polish it, you submit it over and over again. And so I was stuck in that little trap in the beginning, and it wasn't until it became a little more acceptable that I said, "Well, I have 22 books already. What are the odds I'm going to find a publisher who will do all of them?
Hmm.
It's enough to fill a publisher, so why don't I just start my own publishing company?" And that's when I took that step.
It's actually a really interesting point and not it's something that I haven't thought. I'm self-published as well.
Hmm.
So, I hadn't thought about the angle of if will your publisher publish all your books because they often have their preferences around genre and target audience and everything. And if you're an author like myself who writes a bunch of different types of things, yeah, finding one publisher is probably unlikely. I'm
Yeah,
just
and a lot of my books too were in a fantasy romance series, and a lot of publishers will say, "Well, we'll try your first one and see if we want to publish the rest," but they hold the rights to your first one for a couple years. So even if they don't want to publish your second one that's already ready, you have to wait because they have your first, and it just sounded like a nightmare. I'd rather just manage myself.
Well, agreed. Yeah, and then it sounds like you and I went through very similar things. Granted, I did not start writing 7 years ago. Oh,
Mm.
actually, maybe I did. It's
Ah,
2024. Sorry, I lose track of dates all the time. It was around
so do
6 years
I.
ago. Um, but no, with the speed that you write, sounds like you and I came to the same conclusion. I would much rather write at the speed at which I can and do something with it rather than just sit on things. There's
Exactly.
just the time to completion is silly for traditional publishing sometimes.
It's
Um,
kind of like driving to a location. You can sit in traffic or you can take the side roads, and somehow the side roads feel better, even though you get there at the same
it's
time.
true. That's very true. Side roads may be a little bit bumpy, but it's okay. You get there, and sometimes
Exactly. You
makes
may wander a bit, but you'll get there and you'll feel productive the whole time.
it's true. Very, very true. Well, I mean, it sounds like you've talked to me historically about your love for creation and just the need for humankind to have some outlet for creation. So clearly, you like the creation phase because 22 books is awesome. That's so great.
Yeah, sure.
Uh, so I guess what led to the decision of writing being your creative outlet as opposed to something else?
That's an interesting question because when I was a child, I loved writing, elementary school. And my parents, trying to be productive and helpful and support their daughter, put me up for a gifted program at the school, and you had to
Okay.
take tests to do it. And so I did like 3 days of testing, and the results came back that I passed everything for it, but the creativity section. And I decided then, when I was like 11, that I wasn't creative enough to write anymore. So I stopped. I had a little journal I wrote in all the time. Nope, I was done. I had been told by the system I was not creative. So I didn't touch it again. And then in college, I was an English major with American literature focus. And I did a lot of writing, but it was all persuasive or essays and things like that because I still didn't think I was creative enough. And so over the years, I tried a bunch of other outlets. I did a lot of crafting, I did cake making, I trained dogs for a while. I was trying to find the thing that fulfilled me. And then it wasn't until I had had my last child um, that I was just sitting there, like feeling the weight of motherhood and a need to get that outlet out and not knowing what to do. And I read this article about like the worst case effects of global warming. And they included like giant mosquitoes and like dust bowls and all these things. And it read like a really bad novel. And I decided if they could do it, I could too. So I wrote a really bad novel and I never stopped after that. And they improved, I think.
Oh, I would imagine that they have. Now, granted, I haven't had the opportunity to read. I wish I could read more, but I don't. Haven't read your books, but the covers are absolutely beautiful. And,
Thank
based on
you.
the reviews from what I was looking at, it seems like they're not horrible. So I don't think you have
They
anything to worry
aren't,
about.
22 books in, I should have something worth saying, right?
Well, but I think, you bring up a really interesting point that I think a lot of listeners and maybe people who are noodling with the idea of writing, there's a lot of societal pressures and or um, external feedback that make a person feel like, well, I can't do that because I was the same way. My whole life, I've loved reading. I've loved reading and story creation, but they remained in my head. I created stories in my head constantly, constantly, but I never wrote any of it down because, you know, I was worried that I wasn't eloquent enough. I don't have a big enough vocabulary. I can't write prose very beautifully, so I'm just never going to do it until, like you said, I wrote my first book and I can't stop now. So
Right.
it's
It's
funny how
addictive.
that happens. But for you, did you notice a change in your life once you found writing and hit it more regularly?
I absolutely did. It was kind of the turning point in my life. I love motherhood, but it can be isolating
Yeah.
at times, and it can be a very demanding of your schedule and your emotions. And so there were a lot of things like I tried and ended up not keeping because they didn't strike a passion with me, and I just couldn't afford spending that time on it if I didn't
Hmm.
love it. But when I found writing, I I just felt something feel complete. And when I sat down to write, I was excited about it. And when I was done writing, I felt fulfilled. And as I started to enter that world and enjoyed each new piece that I came across, my confidence grew, my friend
Mm.
circles grew, and I didn't become a lonely mother. I shifted from a lonely mother to a fulfilled and happy mother. So it gave me the freedom to do what I love because it's a very flexible career, and the passion and joy and fulfillment that I needed to find as an individual outside of motherhood. So,
Absolutely. Yeah, I can totally agree with that, except for the motherhood part, because I'm not a mother. However, I
close.
have conversations with my wife and recognize that, definitely the challenges that come with that. In her case, her creative outlet is actually cooking and homesteading. So we,
Mm-hmm.
we have goats and chickens, and she creates things with milk. That's what she does. She really enjoys putting a lot of her
Awesome.
creativity into that. I've asked her, like, have you ever thought about writing? And she's like, no, definitely not for me, which is fine. It's
It
great.
is like everyone's passion will be different.
But I think you bring up a good point about this, just the inherent need for humanity to have an outlet for creation, whatever that is. I can definitely shine a light easily on the days that I create versus those that I don't.
Hmm.
You get to the end and you're just like frustrated. Sometimes I'm like, why am I so frustrated? I had a generally good day, but I just feel unsatisfied with the day. It's like, oh, that's right. I didn't have a chance to write today because of one thing or another. And it's
Yeah,
funny how that is. It just affects everything.
it does.
So have you noticed, I mean, you've written 22 books, which is awesome. Have you noticed the process getting significantly easier with each book over time?
Um, yes, overall, I would say yes, especially if you have certain stories that you
Mm.
love to write. You know, a lot of my stories include a lot of action. I like to move the plot along.
Yeah.
I throw in some kissing and, things like that. But when I'm in my comfortable realm of what I'm used to writing and what I love to write, I find it does flow super easily. I can usually write a book in 15 to 30 days.
Nice.
Um, but I have a book right now that is for my steampunk series, and it's more of a journey book as opposed to a action adventure mystery book. And so it's actually taking me, I've been working on it for like 2 months now, and it's not done because it's a plot system I'm not as familiar with. So I've had to do a lot more research and
Yeah.
tell myself it's okay that she's not fighting anyone right now because in these tropes it's a little different. So it really depends on what I'm writing. I'm also branching out into some nonfiction,
Nice.
and that's taking me a little longer as I learn the ropes for those as well.
That makes sense. Well, I mean, no one's gonna sniff at taking 2 months to write a book. I can tell you that much. Hearing 15 to 30 days makes my brain explode. I thought that's awesome. I love that. That's
Thanks.
like Stephen King status in terms
That's
of
right. I'm coming
writing
for him.
speed. You got- you're getting close. I think he does his in like 10 days or something. I can't
Yeah.
recall.
Oh my
Something to
goodness.
that degree. But I'm curious to know because, for me, the easiest part of writing is the creation phase. I love creating. I could write story after story. In fact, I think I've written 10 books so far, so definitely not as many as you, but I
Wow.
haven't published that many. I've just written them because the
Yeah.
creation phase is easy for me. Editing, what does editing look like for you? Do you edit as quickly as you write, or does it take longer?
It depends on the book. It
Fair
can
enough.
go as quickly. I I have a knack for editing. I edit a lot of other people's work as well. Kind of all I do right now is editing,
Mm,
and I've been having to force myself to write again because I've been missing that piece because editing doesn't quite fulfill me in the same way. But if it does take longer, it's because I'm avoiding making a change. I recognize this change needs to happen, but I just don't want to. And so procrastination makes editing take longer sometimes.
well, I can't sit here and pretend that that doesn't happen to me as well. I'm clearly procrastinating. I have a book that I finished at least a year ago that I haven't,
Yeah.
just like, I'll edit that later. I'll just write
Yeah.
something
You're
new.
like, it's done. It's sitting there. It's not going anywhere.
Yeah, it needs to get edited though. No, I mean, you bring up a good point about it depends on the book, but also just depends on your life circumstances because they do require different parts of your brain. I feel like it's creativity in different ways. And
Mhm.
so for me, just the drafting process, I'm able to, it's almost like I'm dreaming, when I'm writing because I'm
Yes.
I'm also a pretty heavy pantser discovery writer. Um,
Yay.
I often have no idea where the story's going until I'm
I'm the same
surprised by
way.
something. I'm writing and also I'm like, whoa, did not expect that. That's crazy.
I think
Um,
that's why editing can be hard because it's taking that pantsing energy where I just discovered things and saying, well, you did discover it, but you could have discovered it slightly better. Go fix
exactly.
it. I'm like, "Ugh."
But for me, at least for me, it's less like I have a hard time. I don't have a hard time letting go of things because it's fine. Like if it needs to be edited, that's okay. For me, it's
Yeah.
the overwhelm of the length of the manuscript and knowing how it's not as easy as changing a few sentences. If you change even a
No,
slight personality, it's like, great. Now I have to go through the entire book every time that character has interactions and make sure it aligns with this slight personality change. And for me, that overwhelms me. It's like, whoa, that's so
it
much.
can be. It's kind of stepping out of, the trees and looking at the forest.
Yep.
And there are so many trees in it that you're like, okay, but I
Hmm.
get what you're saying. And it's a little harder sometimes too for me because I actually need bigger chunks of time to do the editing than writing. Because writing, I can sit down and write a scene and move on. But when I'm editing big picture, then I'm like, okay, I need to go change these 5 chapters now, or I'm going to forget where they are. And so it's a little more demanding on my time that way.
No, that's actually a good point. I look at my blocks of time in between job and taking care of animals and kids and everything. Just like, ooh, I only have 20 minutes. That's not enough time for editing. So I guess I'll just write something instead.
Mm.
That happens more often than not.
Yeah, exactly.
So, but everyone has their strengths and their weaknesses. I'm curious to know from the creation standpoint, because 22 books, I would imagine they're not all part of the same world. You probably have multiple
No, they're not.
series.
Hmm.
So, how do you keep it all straight? Are you writing more than one book at a time or not usually?
Yes, I usually have a couple books going at a time. I've got 3 going right now.
Okay.
Um, and then I will pop off short stories occasionally. It's not too hard for me to keep things straight because I write very character-driven novels. So when I choose to write a novel, it's aside from my first one, that one in a drawer, but got me writing. They've all been characters come to my mind, and I write a story around them. So keeping the book straight is just a matter of rejoining that character in my mind, and it's not always easy on my husband because sometimes he'll just walk in and I'll just be like crying, and he's like, "What's wrong?" I'm like, "It's nothing. It's just my character." And then he'll come back 30 minutes later, and if I start another book, I'm just angry, and he's like, "Okay, you're just writing today. I'll just back off."
And
And
just step away and let you do your
yeah,
thing. So,
exactly. But to keep things straight sometimes, because the worlds can get pretty vast, I have my flora and fauna sheets, my world building sheets, my character sheets that are my little go-tos when I prepare myself to get into a scene if I need some refreshing. So
that is the organization I admire. I need to be better about that. I do have intermittent sheets all over the place where I've put little tidbits of data,
yeah.
but I abandoned the notebook thing because I have lots of one page filled notebooks all over the place.
Oh, yeah, me
I
too.
can't write
I
anything
use
down.
yeah, I have like Google Docs for it. And it actually was the same way. I never wrote anything down. But my Fires of Cough series is co-written, and so we had to put it in a central place so we could keep up with each other, and that kind of trained me into better habits.
I want to talk a little bit about co-writing because I co-authored a trilogy as well with someone, and it was a
Yeah,
very fun and different experience.
so
But before
fun.
we get into that, I'm curious to know how you keep your creative well filled, right? Because generally, the way I've heard a lot of people describe it is you've got your creativity, that there's this well that you're drawing from whenever you need to create something, and it can get exhausted depending on the timeline. Everybody's different. So how do you keep that filled to make sure you're always ready to create?
I think it's kind of 2 things for me. The first is that I try to enjoy the genre I'm in. And like you, I don't have a lot of time to read as much as I want to, especially because when I'm reading, I'm usually editing someone's something.
Oh,
But
sure.
I can get it through watching fantasy movies if I'm writing a fantasy series. And really just trying to enjoy those, or dabbling in D&D, or just talking to other creatives about their stories really gives you that energy. So
Interesting.
that's been helpful to me. And then my second one is actually not putting constraints on it. So I actually went through a period last year where I was really struggling to write. I was just like, I don't feel creative. I don't want to write. And that's like part of who I am. So I was concerned with why that was going on. And everyone's like the fatal writer's block they never overcome. And I was like, what if that's coming for me? But
Oh, no.
um it really challenged my ideas because I didn't believe in writer's block before that. I believed in like habits. If you just sit down and do it, it'll come. But I was really struggling. And I realized after some time that it's because I had a lot of looming deadlines. I said, I have to write this book by then. I have to write
Mm,
this book by then. And putting that pressure to have those things done really, really squashed my creativity. And so when I just said, okay, like, yes, like one of them was for a Kickstarter. And I was like, you did promise them this Kickstarter book, but it's Kickstarter. So things get pushed off as long as you deliver and you communicate, it'll be okay. And all the other deadlines, your horrible boss made for you. And I'm the horrible boss. I made them for myself.
hmm.
So I just said, relax and calm down because forcing yourself to hit these deadlines is making you create nothing. And so I took all those constraints away and told myself it was okay. And then I finished that Kickstarter book the next week. And so for me, adding too much pressure and societal expectations and deadlines on is what kills my creativity the most. So if I can just keep those off, then I'm usually able to create pretty well.
Well, I mean, you bring up a really important point that hopefully people listening realize is that what works for you is unique and it's okay. Because I also can't work with deadlines. I work so much faster when I don't have deadlines. I don't know what it
Yeah,
is. It's just like I don't want to procrastinate. I can just create and create and create. But the moment is like I have to finish this many words by the end of today, or I have to have this part done by next week. I'm just like, yeah, I'm just gonna put it off. I don't want to do that anymore. It's kind of weird.
exactly.
Some
It
people work
is.
with deadlines, and for me, it just doesn't work. So, whatever mantras or advice you hear, take it with a grain of salt as an author. Make sure it works for you, and if it doesn't, don't feel bad. Be like, yeah, I tried it, didn't work for me. I know this
And
works for me.
and try things
Yeah,
too. If 15 minutes a day works for some people, try it.
yeah,
And if writing to a word count works for you, try it. And if deadlines work, try it. And if they don't, try that too, because that's
exactly.
when you find out what your groove is.
Yeah, it's just so hard because a lot of people, I've heard a lot of people say, well, I heard about this advice from X book or X writing advice from this person, and I've been trying it for months and months and it's just not working. And be like, it's okay to not. Like it's really
Mhm.
okay. You're not downplaying them or invalidating the things that they said by it not working for you.
Yeah,
It's totally fine that it doesn't.
exactly. We're all individuals and we all need to create our own way.
Exactly. And accept that. So yeah, let's shift gears a little bit to the co-writing because I'm curious to know
Sure.
what made you decide to do some co-writing for some of your books?
Well, I have a writers group I meet with weekly,
Okay.
and I I was talking to them about how I had always wanted to co-write a romance novel. I wanted to co-write a romance novel with two POVs, and I write one and someone else write the other. I thought it just sounded fun. And there was a girl in my group named Leah, who she was the newest member at the time. So some of us had been there years, and she'd been there about a year. Um, or maybe a little less. But I brought it up again at that time. I was like, oh yeah, I'm glad you like this chapter, but like I really want to like co-write a romance, like co-write a book. And she's like, let's do it. And I was like, haha. And she's like, no, let's do it. And I was like, whoa, like, okay. But then we tried it. We just said, okay. And she's like, I've had this idea for a book. But I haven't been able to start it because I just can't picture the other character. So why don't
Mm,
I write the character I have already pictured and you pick the other one? And that ended up being the first book in the Fires of Koth series, The Covenant of Shihala. So there's Jamil and Islet, and I ended up writing Islet. And we wrote that book in 14 days.
my
It's
goodness.
about 120 something thousand words. And we loved it. And so we wrote about 14 more, I think. So four of the ones we have co-written are out. The other ones need editing and things like that. But just starting and feeling that energy, we just couldn't stop.
Wait, so that's 14 between the two of you. Is that on top of the 22 you wrote yourself or included in those?
I included the
Okay.
the 14 in that.
That's no complaints. I was like doing the math. And I was like, wait, did you actually write more than 22? I mean, I think that's awesome. The co-authoring, there's a lot of advantages to it. There may be some
Mhm.
disadvantages if you have some
Yeah.
differences in writing process, but it sounds like you and Lyra or Leia, excuse me, is that how you
Yeah.
pronounce it?
Yes.
Have very similar writing styles, so maybe that hasn't been a problem for you.
We did. And that I think was really important for us because we both write quickly.
Hmm.
Our writing levels were similar,
Hmm.
and we both wrote in the evenings primarily. So whenever we needed scenes or wrote together, we were available for each other to write. And that made it possible because we weren't waiting on the other one if they
Hmm.
wrote a lot slower and they were available when we needed. And so our writing styles being similar was very helpful in making the co-writer relationship work.
Very cool. So, what to
Yeah.
walk me through what the writing process looked like? Did you each write your own sections and then combine them, or was it like I'll write one chapter, pass it to you, you write the next chapter, and so on and so forth? How did you
So
do that?
how we did it is it's a every other chapter POV book.
Okay.
Um, and so if we didn't need the other person, we would just write our chapter and they would come back to it. And then if our main characters were in the same scene together, we would be on at the same time. And the person whose POV it was in, so let's say it was Ilette's, I would be in charge of everything around the dialogue. So I'd set the scene, I'd write the internals, I'd do all of that, and she would just respond to the conversation as it came, and vice versa. So she would have creative control of her chapter, and I'd have creative control of mine, and we would just intermingle for the dialogue. And same with the side characters. If they were really minor side characters, they didn't really belong to either of us, but sometimes we'd really get the voice of one, and we'd have the other person come in and write those, when we needed them
Very cool.
for the dialogue.
I so silly, but I would be self-conscious watching, knowing someone was watching me type.
I felt that way at first, and so did Leia. It was kind of an adjustment thing. But after 130,000 words, you stop caring.
That's true. Well, I mean that's a good point. Times
Yeah.
14.
Yeah,
Definitely at
exactly.
that point you don't care anymore.
No, you
So
don't.
editing, the editing as a co-author, what does that look like? Do you edit together on calls or you
That
take your
was the
turns?
painful part. So we wrote really well together, but edited and ran a business differently. And that
Mm,
was a struggle for us. We tried having it be where we each edited our own chapters first, because we had a rule when we were writing that you couldn't edit at all. You couldn't edit the other person's or your own because we were just focused on creativity when writing. So we'd wait till the book was done, we'd let it sit, and then we'd come back to it. And so we'd each give our own chapters an edit, and then come back and give the other person's chapters an edit. And then Leia's task for the business was to do the final edit. Um, but that was tricky because we were also really, really good friends. And so we didn't critique as hard as maybe we should have occasionally
mm,
because we were trying to protect that creativity process and not
sure.
start bickering. And then the final say, I think, was helpful because you have to get to the point where you let it out. But it did cause some contention because I didn't always agree with the final edits. Um, and so there were a lot of things I just had to swallow. So the editing is harder because that's when you're taking it and shaping it more than just letting things flow, and it can be tricky.
Yeah, definitely recognize that. My co-author and I did something a little bit different with the editing, just because we have different editing styles as well as
Yeah.
different editing strengths. And so, it was one of the situations where she said, "Here, how about you go through the entire book and make your edit suggestions, and then I'll take a look at those and then, accept or reject anything you put in there and then add my own and then pass it back to you." So we kind of did that a little bit. Now, granted, our books weren't huge. We did middle grade books, so they were like a
Oh,
fourth of
fun.
the size of yours. It
Yeah,
was primarily an experiment because neither of us had ever considered
absolutely.
co-authoring. We're like, let's just give this a go. Turned out to be fun. But yeah, that worked for us a little bit because the contention was easier to deal with in that instance for us because it wasn't live. And, in text, if we had questions, we jump on the phone. But for the most part, she could explain her case via words, and I could explain my case via words. And oftentimes we're like, yeah, no, I can definitely see that. But I can imagine if were you doing edits live sometimes with each other?
Yeah, occasionally we did. If we knew there was like a scene that was a problem, like, well, let's hop on, and then we'd kind of just go through it together, which was always a little feisty. But for the most part, we resolved everything.
Well, I mean, I think there's always going to be definitely co-authoring. You're working with a different person with different experiences.
Hmm.
They've gone through a lot of different things than you. They have different perspectives. So there's always going to be something where it doesn't jive perfectly. If
It's
it
true.
You just got to be prepared for that.
Hmm. Yeah, exactly. So it's just everyone gets excited about the co-writing, and they should. The energy in co-writing is amazing for your productivity. And it's really fun to like write, and then the next day you come back and you get to read and write.
Yeah,
And
it's cool.
whatever problem was there, the other person did something else with it. Maybe it's worse, but it's not the same problem you left with. And so it kind of gets that exciting, like, I'm going to get things going. Um, but there are also the elements after it, like the editing and the business parts of it that writers should keep in mind if they want their co-written project to be published.
Yeah, and we don't have to get into it, but I can only imagine from the financial and royalty standpoint, there's a lot to
Yeah,
figure out there
it's
that
true.
I mean it looks like you're in Kindle Unlimited with those books. Is that correct?
We're just now removing them to go wide for a little while
Perfect.
and try it out. So
Okay. The only reason I mentioned that because I know Draft to Digital has royalty splitting options, so
it does.
which
Yeah.
helps a little
Which is
bit.
so nice. I wish more platforms would do that.
Well, yeah, I think transparently, this is maybe a little bit of it's not a complaint or anything, but it just a lot of these bigger websites, Amazon, care more about their business than helping you run your business, which, they are at liberty to do that. That's their business. They can do whatever they want. But definitely Ingram Spark and um, Amazon are not very optimized for
They're
authors in a
not.
lot
They're
of
not
ways.
trying super hard to keep our business,
No.
but maybe as things become more competitive, they'll step it up a little.
Maybe. Well, one can hope, but we
We can
do what
hope.
we can with what we
That's right.
have. But yeah, so I'm also curious to know from a creative standpoint where you get your inspiration for your stories. Do they just come throughout the day, or is it really you just have the character, you don't really know what the world looks like, and you just dive in and it builds as you write? Is that what it looks like?
I mean, largely, yes. Occasionally there will be another element where I'll hear a really cool like life story someone had, and I want to make a like incorporate that into something, or
Hmm.
occasionally I'll think of an ending. My book, The Pharaoh's Curse, which is the second one in my steampunk series, I actually had the character in mind. She came to mind, and then I knew the vague twist at the end. And I don't know why it was a twist because I didn't know anything that happened before that. But I had her and I had a goal to get to. But often it's just from experiencing people. People are so can be so interesting. Not everyone's interesting. I'm just going to be honest, but
That's fair.
a lot of people are. And if you like listen to those and stories they have, I've even written some elements of stories into my books that readers were then like, that's not realistic. And I was like, but that one actually happened.
Hmm.
And so I think we take for granted a lot how interesting normal life can be. But then we take those stories and we throw them in a fantasy setting, and then people want to hear them at that point.
Yeah, it's an interesting point you bring up because yeah, there's just a lot of uniqueness in the world with people and stories. I to date haven't written anything from real life experiences for myself or anybody else. But I think that's really cool that you can draw inspiration from talking to other people. Um,
Absolutely.
that's
I
very,
even
very
have a
cool.
little sheet in sometimes they're just side characters, but I'll go and like a waiter will just talk in a certain way that I'm like, I have to put this in my book, and I just make a note. Or I met this lady on a cruise ship and I was like, oh my, like she was one of the workers there, but I was like, you are fascinating. And I just like made notes. I'm like, she hasn't come out yet, but she's waiting. Like, so sometimes I just like find people who are just so unique. I just have to jot them down.
I love that. That's very, very cool. So what do you use to jot them down just from like a logistics standpoint? Is it just like in a Google Doc on your phone or?
Yeah, it's just a Google Doc on my phone because that's what I know I'll always have because I started a bunch of one-page journals, just like
Hmm.
you.
Yeah,
But having that doc, I have a doc called Story Ideas, and I have a doc called Interesting People. And so I just plop them into either one of those as they come along.
that's very, very cool. I am probably the least organized person you could talk to in this world. Um, and so this is such a terrible mantra, but I am always getting ideas while I'm doing other things. And
Mhm.
so I often implement well, if I remember this when I get to my next writing session, then it deserves to be in. If not, then I guess it's gone. And I often remember most of the things, but there are
Yeah.
occasionally ideas like, I don't really remember that was, but I know a new idea is going to come at any time. I do love the idea though of the interesting people because I
Mhm.
do meet a lot of very interesting people when you're out and about. But for
You,
some reason,
right?
it never makes the connection to me like, just you should write that person into a book. That's very
It's
cool.
so fun when you're thinking of side characters, just be like, oh yeah, that interesting person, and
Hmm.
like the way they talk or the way they carry themselves or what they talk about. And it's just an easy resource. So
I'll have to give that a go. I do. Google Docs works for me very, very well.
me too.
Despite the age of AI, I know there's a lot of unrest about potentially
Mhm.
Google leveraging the content you put into it for AI, but we don't have to
I
talk
figure
about that.
they already have 22 books of mine, so why stop at this point?
No, honestly, that's actually my perspective as well. I know there may be some AI haters listening, and that's fine. You are allowed to have um, whatever opinion you have about it, but I'm the same way. I'm just like, well, I mean, it's already done. So I feel like
Done.
there's,
And like I don't want to give into the fear. I know it's
mm,
unknown. I know it's going to change the landscape, but I've already learned so much
mhm.
and taught other people so much that I'm not afraid of keeping up with the tide. And I think, as a people, yeah, we can handle it. Like, and
Mhm.
if we just focus on individuals and what we can do, I don't think my creativity is not going to stop because of AI. And I'm not going to stop writing awesome books because of AI. So, I think we just, instead of focusing on the outward and being afraid, focus on the inward and be brave and bolster ourselves. I think that's what we should focus
You put that very eloquently and beautifully, and I agree wholeheartedly because, you know, personally, I don't have challenges with my creation phase. And so I
on.
don't feel the need to leverage AI because I don't struggle there. I love the creation phase. I feel like implementing AI into it would just make it hard and or not fun for myself personally. Now, it's
Yeah,
not my place to judge anybody else what they feel is worse for or worth it for them. But yeah, in the same way, I know the way my brain works, and I know that there's absolutely no way a computer could model that. Because, and
exactly.
I'm just one person. Every writer has their own level of creativity, their own way of thinking, and an AI will never ever be able to replicate that. So
Exactly. Mm.
yeah, it doesn't
I
worry
will
me too
say
much.
I have used it to research once. I was writing a mystery. So I asked the AI, what are the five most likely outcomes? And
Yeah.
so I said, I'm not going to use any of those because everyone will be expecting them.
Oh, fair enough.
And then I went with something else from there. So that was my foray into trying it out. But like you said, I don't struggle with the creativity. And if people keep trying different methods out, they'll find what sparks their creativity.
Yeah.
And then, that'll help them too.
Absolutely. And I like the looking inwards to yourself because,
Yeah.
and once again, it's not my place to say what someone should or should not do if they feel like it's worth it for them. I just know it's not worth it for me. So
Exactly.
that's what I'll keep doing. But well, hey, this has been an amazing conversation. I would love to, we could probably talk forever about all of these
We
various
probably
things, but
could.
we are running a little short on time. So before we end here, where can people find more information about you and your books?
Sure. I have an author website, kyrodean.com, and a publisher website, which is 8moonspublishing.com. And then they're on all the platforms now. We're getting them all up there. So if you love Amazon, they're there, but they're they'll be on Kobo and Ingram and everything that D2D publishes to Apples. We're getting them up on everything, so that'll be nice as well. And then if you're in Utah, I'm usually at a lot of the conferences and stuff, so you could stop by and say hello.
Were you at LTUE this year?
I was, yeah.
Nice. Very good. I was there as well.
There
But
you go.
we didn't cry. I was in the vendor hall. So if you ventured into the vendor hall, you probably passed me.
I
I had a
probably
table there.
did. See, and I was taking pitches for my company, so I was in
Oh,
the other corner.
that makes sense. Well, very cool. Thank you so much for today. This has been a great conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dan.
I hope you found that encouraging. If those of us who are very busy have a lot of things going on, sometimes it's hard to make space in our lives for that creativity. But it's one of those things that if you let drop out of your life, it can really decrease your quality of life. And I found that for myself as well. On those days where I can't even get a little bit of writing in, I just find myself a little bit more irritable and frustrated. Um, and it's a way to express yourself, and I think everybody needs to be creative in some way or other, whether that's writing or art or hiking or any just thinking. There's all sorts of creative outlets that I think people need to employ. So hopefully you found that. And I'm very excited about how positive Kyro was about making her own covers. I've already learned a lot from her. Hopefully I can continue to learn a lot as I make these covers. Next week, we will be talking to Will Munn about tabletop gaming. Will has worked with a bunch of different authors and artists to put together a D&D type tabletop gaming system. And we talk a lot about that, where he gets his ideas, why he's so passionate about it, and all the things he's currently developing and will develop in the future. So if you're interested in tabletop gaming or just creativity around, the tabletop gaming space, definitely want to stick around for that conversation next week. I think you'll really enjoy it. Will is an awesome guy. I actually met him at LTUE down in Provo when I was down there. My booth was right next to his, so we spent a lot of time chatting. Also met his son and a couple of others, family members. So it was just kind of fun to chat with these people that you meet in person. But yeah, next week is with Will Munn. If you'd like to join me on the podcast, just head to thecasualauthor.com. Fill out the form there. I'd love to learn about you and what you're all about. Or you can email me at dan@thecasualauthor.com. I'd love to coordinate with you in that way. But thank you for listening today, and I hope you join me next week.